everybody. We are here now live for the first of what I hope will be a long-standing series of webinars, just as a temporary replacement for the events which we always like to put on and which always do serve to join the Sport for Business community together. A couple of little housekeeping rules. Anybody that was in the room over the last few minutes will be aware that you're not in a position to speak because 100 voices would be a little bit chaotic. So it's just myself and Jamie, who you can see on screen as well. Hi, Jamie.
Hello.
We'll be taking you through this. There is a chat facility which you can join in up at the top, or down at the bottom of your screens. There's a little Q&A button, and if you want to pose a question or make a comment, which we'll get to as at the end of Jamie's session, we'll have a good sort of 10 or 15 minutes at the end that we can engage a little bit more with you. I hope you enjoy it. I've seen this content. We did on a run through yesterday, so technically it should all work, and inspirationally I know it's going to work as well. So I really do hope you enjoy it. We're back again, in case anybody has to leave. We're back again on Thursday morning for the second part of this, and you can, as ever, catch up with all of the activities and the latest things that we're doing in the Sport for Business Digest and in our new 4 at 4. Which is breaking my heart a little bit, getting content up in the afternoon as well as the morning, but that's what we do. So a very warm welcome again. I do hope you enjoy it, and over to you, Mr. Macken.
Thanks, Rob. Good morning, everyone. I have to start by saying that this is very surreal. I'm sitting in my kitchen with my kids' colours in front of me, and I'm speaking to a laptop, but hopefully you can bear with me, and we can make this work as seamlessly as possible. So first up, a little bit about me. For those who don't know me, Jamie Macken. I'm the Deputy Managing Director of Core Sponsorship. I'm also lucky to sit on the board of the European Sponsorship Association, and my remit there is to help grow the relevance and presence of ESSA into other European markets, particularly outside of the UK and Ireland. I'm very lucky and privileged to be part of a fantastic company called Core. And don't worry, this isn't going to be a sales pitch, just a quick context setter as to what Core is about. The sponsorship practice is part of 9 practices, is one of 9 practices that exist in Core. And we're very privileged to be able to lean into the likes of creative, data, media, research to provide really compelling solutions for our clients. But I'm particularly proud in the context of what's going on in the world today to call out our research and media and creative teams, because they're doing unbelievable work. The likes of clients like HSE providing vital information and intelligence at the moment to the community. So I just want to call them out. It's fantastic work that they're doing. This guy is going to pop up again later on in the presentation, and actually never come across a sacred cow before, but he has relevance today, and I will come back to him later on, and hopefully it'll all make sense when I do. Today's presentation is broken into 2 parts. The first part is market context. It's pretty light touch. It's designed to be a bit of a warmer-upper, just a quick kind of overview of the Irish market, a bit of a scene setter, a bit of a context setter. And then the second part is a bit more dense, and it's quite theory-laden. So bear with me when we go through it. I'll be referencing some different books and going through some marketing and communications theory, which often is neglected when we speak about sponsorship, and I think that's a miss. So that's deliberately why it's in there, and that will be the kind of then the conclusion of today's presentation. So first and foremost, I obviously can't start anything without touching on the world that we live in today, and what we're going to talk about now pales in significance to anything that's going on in the world right now. We know that, and of course I don't need to say that to anybody, but just want to make that point up front. We produced a report last week. This is the cover of it. It's called COVID-19 Sponsorship Impact. And Rob very kindly has published it on his site, on Sport for Business. So if you haven't seen it, please download it and have a look. It gives this sort of scene as we see the Irish sponsorship market today in the context of what's going on. I'm going to say no more about it. I just wanted to put this in to say that this webinar and this tutorial was written and designed well in advance of any virus. So I'm going to proceed as if there is no virus, that magic world where we're living as we used to live. So I might reference it now and again, but by and large, I'm going to proceed with no virus references. So to kick off, a pretty straightforward question. If you're all sitting at home, have a little think about what you think the answer to that question is. And I'm sure most of you are thinking of maybe a big sports team. You're possibly thinking of a GAA property. And I'm sure many of you are thinking of venues. And you'd be right, because the two biggest deals in the Irish market are in fact the Three Arena and the Aviva Stadium. They're nip and tuck. And this slide here is by no means categorized in exact order. Some of them are kind of more or less the same. You could swap order by one or two places, but it gives you a sense of the top end of the market. And it kind of tipped over the 4 million per annum fee investments down to sort of under 800K with the top 15. That's rights fee only. That's not activation spends. It would be impossible to work that out. I think most sponsors would probably struggle to work out their own activation investments at times. But as you can see, there's a lot of sport in there. And this top end of the market commands a premium, and every year rates will often go up for the fees that are paid when contracts come up. But after that 15, it becomes a buyer's market fairly quickly. And I don't need to say that to many of the people on this call today. It's a challenging world out there when it comes to sponsorship. And once you drop off this list, not too far after that, it becomes quite challenging, and the fees drop down quite substantially. When you break down the sponsors of those top 15 into the industry sectors, the Irish market looks like nearly every other market that you would analyse. Sponsorship is dominated by financials and utilities and telcos. This doesn't feature any pouring deals. They are substantial. Some of the biggest deals in the market are pouring. Heineken's Live Nation deal or Diageo's deal, etc. They'll be big deals. It doesn't include benefit in kind. But the Irish market is like other markets. And utilities and financials tend to invest in this space because they're less tangible products. And obviously sponsorship brings a more emotive depth to their communications and so on. Before the coronavirus set in, we had expected the Irish, and that's the island market, to grow by around 7% this year to around 220 million. That's inclusive of media sponsorship. So sports, arts, culture, cause, media sponsorship. Again, that's just fees. Obviously, the world we live in has changed things, and that will not be the case, but it's too early for us to forecast what the reality will be. But what I will say is that over the last number of years, sponsorship has been very healthy, and it's outpaced investment in advertising elsewhere pretty much year on year. So it's a growing market, and fingers crossed when things subside, it'll continue to be so. Again, very broad brushstroke statement to make here, but the Irish market is, again, like other markets, it's dominated by sport. You could say 70-30, 65-35, whatever, but as you would have seen from the slides earlier, sport does make up the lion's share, and not surprising when you think that sponsorship is all about playing with passion, and sport is probably the leader when it comes to passion. It makes up the largest side of our market. When it comes to the rights holders, though, I wonder if you at home can think now what the big four might be. Pretty quickly, I'm sure you'll jump in again to the GAA, the IRFU, the FAI, but often forgotten, but by no means the smallest, and a real powerhouse is Live Nation. Live Nation, for those who don't know Live Nation, I'm sure you all do, but in case you don't, Live Nation would be behind the likes of Three Arena, the Broadcast Energy Theatre, a number of venues, but also the Electric Picnic and Longitude Festivals and many others. Very slick commercial operation in the world of sponsorship. Moving beyond rights holders and brands, the industry is really made up of a myriad of agencies. The PR agencies have been the kind of driving force for a long time in sponsorship, doing a lot of the negotiation, a lot of planning, a lot of activation of sponsorship, and some of our contemporaries in that world still do amazing work in that space. But often not spoken about is media. Media has always played a really big role in sponsorship. There's very few sponsorships that aren't activated with some element media, in some cases significant media investment. Creative agencies have obviously always played a big role in the ideation and the execution phase, but also very much in the insight development and strategic thinking phase. Talent, more specific and more specialized, is growing all the time. We're seeing more and more talent deals with brand ambassadors growing into broader sponsorship deals. And that's only going to continue as individual athletes have more and more sway with their media and social media profiles and so on. Experiential production activation agencies have always played a big role. And then on the very left there is specialist, and we would define ourselves as that in core sponsorship. But you also get the likes of legal entities. But if you can imagine being a sponsor, embarking in sponsorship for the first time, or maybe even very mature and savvy sponsors there's an awful lot of entities to deal with on a daily basis. All these agencies, you've got your rights holder, and you've got internal factions. It's quite a complicated world to navigate. And we're providing one-stop solutions. We hope that sometimes can be easier. The good news is that we're brilliant in Ireland. We're very, very good at sponsorship. And that image there is of Lynn Darcy from Electric Ireland, holding 5, no less, of her European Sponsorship Association awards, the last year's awards. The European Sponsorship Associations are kind of become the pinnacle of Europe for excellence. And a lot of Irish brands have done consistently well there. And not to mention, obviously, Electric Ireland already have Vodafone. And even the likes of AOB, who've spoken at the Cannes Advertising Festival or the IEG conference in the United States. And this year, the likes of Impost won as well. So we don't need to look across the pond or to other markets to get a feel for how good other markets are. We got some of the best work happening in this market. But it's not all rosy, and there are challenges, and a lot of them are by our own making. And I'm going to say, I'm going to call out measurement, and I probably could have called that out 10 years ago, and everyone on this call would have heard measurement being called out plenty of times. But really, there's no excuse for not understanding the effectiveness of sponsorship anymore. Everything can be measured, and we still tear our hair out when it falls off the budget plan or is an afterthought. The irony is that sponsorship is also sometimes let down by investment into activation, and the best activations are actually fueled by good measurement. So the two go hand in hand. And when you look at the slides previous and you see how competitive it's getting out there and how good we are at activating sponsorship, it goes without saying that sponsors need to invest more to elevate their sponsorship, to compete. And the last thing I'll say about, facing up to some of our own challenges is to invest beyond sport and that marquee music into the broader arts and into some of the more niche sports. Lidl's investment in the Ladies Gaelic Football Association doesn't need any mention here. It's been unbelievable success. But at the time, that would have been a really brave call. And they've taken something that would have been quite small, maybe not overly resourced, and have been able to work to something fantastic. And there are a lot of opportunities like that exist in the Irish marketplace. So that was the first section. As I said, it was the light touch context setter into the Irish marketplace. This bit now is going to be more theory laden, and I'm going to kick on now into it. So this first quote is by a man called Harold Gossage. I won't pretend to really know a huge amount about him. I read a book called The Case for Creativity, which I was lucky enough to come across when I was visiting the Cannes Advertising Festival in 2016. And this quote is written about the importance of creativity. But when you read it, it actually has absolutely everything to do with sponsorship. If you think of the mix between creativity and emotion, sponsorship is a really, really potent mix. Lots, sometimes millions of passionate people are at their most engaged when they're switched on to their favorite match or into a music event and so on. I mean, if you just think of some of the figures around the likes of watching the All-Ireland Football or Hurling Championships peaking at over 1 million, Six Nations matches, or indeed the likes of the Late Late Toy Show, which will command huge audiences. It gives you an idea of where people's passions are and where sponsorship can play. Needless to say, media, while it provides you with an audience and a possibility, it doesn't convert it. And that's where creativity and emotion and authenticity and the magic of sponsorship really comes into play. And I'm going to break that down in a second. But before I do, I just want to show you a quick video, which I think really gets to the core of what I'm trying to articulate.
This chair was built for breaking things, like rules, stereotypes, and world records. This chair was built for breaking things, to remind us limits is just a little word that makes a swooshing sound when you pass it. This chair was built for breaking things, a tool designed by the world's best engineers to dismantle, destroy, and dominate, driven by a will of steel and destined to chase gold. This chair was built for breaking things, to reimagine, rethink, and redefine what it means to be an athlete. And once every limit has been passed, every expectation smashed, and every record broken, together, we will have built something great. The ultimate dream machine.
It's not the newest of case studies, I have to confess. It's from ahead of the 2016 Rio Games. BMW was a long-standing partner of Team USA for the Paralympic team, also for the winter bobsled team and for the summer team. But They are no longer the sponsor of the summer team, but they still have a relationship like the bobsleigh team and the swimming team and so on. But I think that's just a fantastic example of an execution of a sponsorship. It was only one of a number of touch points of that campaign. There was a documentary made. There was multi-different activations. But if you watch that, you can't not escape the fact that it's unbelievably emotional, first and foremost. It's beautifully creative. It's also fantastically authentic, because it's an example of a sponsor and a rights holder coming together for mutually beneficial goals. In this case, BMW brought its engineering and technological prowess to assist with the Paralympic team to re-engineer their equipment. It did the same with the bobsled team, rebuild the whole bobsled team's equipment as well. And if you watch that again and again, you'll really notice that BMW doesn't force any messaging there, any brand, any product offers, or anything like that. It's simply a narrative about shared goals and a vision. And it's unbelievably powerful as a result of it. And I suppose if you were to sum it up, BMW understands that rational decision-making won't sell them a lot of cars. If I'm going to go and buy a car based on rational decision-making, I'm not going to buy a BMW. I'll probably buy a more practical and economically sensible car, for want of a better way of describing it. But higher up the purchase funnel, emotion plays a really, really important role. And I want to look at that now. So let's break it down. Let's break down emotion, and let's break down some other tenets of sponsorship that make it really a powerful marketing tool. I'm going to start with quite a clunky slide, so forgive me, but it's necessary. This is the definition of sponsorship as by the European Sponsorship Association. I'm going to read it. Sponsorship is a commercial agreement by which a sponsor, for the mutual benefit of the sponsor and the sponsored party, contractually provides financing or other support in order to establish an association between the sponsor's image, brands, or products and a sponsorship property in return for rights to promote this association and for the granting of certain agreed direct or indirect benefits. Very clunky, but in fairness to ESSA, it has to be comprehensive. While not a definition, well, a way that we would like to articulate the power of sponsorship is this. It's the ability to create an authentic, emotional connection with a targeted audience via a shared passion. So a targeted audience there being fans, and fandom is obviously very, very rich. And the key words there are authenticity and emotion. And I'm going to delve into that a bit more now. So why is emotion important? We all know that sponsorship is an inherently emotional tool. We talk about it a lot, but where's the proof? You know, how does it work? Well, this is the first book I'm going to reference today, and this is Marketing in the Era of Accountability by Les Bennett and Peter Field. So please take note of it. And in this book, there's an exhaustive study done of the UK's IPA bank of data, looking at creatively award-winning work. And they've correlated and looked at it against share price and business performance over a number of years. And they've been able to prove that emotionally based campaigns outperform rationally based campaigns on every business measure. In fact, emotional campaigns are more profitable, they're better at generating awareness, stronger at creating differentiation, and form more durable memories of brands in consumers' minds. And that's really important. I'll come back to that in a sec. I just want to also make the point, though, that that's not to say there isn't a place for rational campaigns. Of course there is. The best marketing plans will have rational and more emotive messaging in there. Rational is very, very important when it comes down to the purchase funnel and you're closer to the point of making consideration. But at the earlier decision-making process, emotion gets filtered in better. And I want to go back to that point of durable memories of brands, because that's where sponsorship really plays in the emotion space. We all have a network of information for brands in our heads. You can call them brand associations. So for example, if you think of Coca-Cola, I'm thinking of Coca-Cola, I think of red. For me, I think of the Santa Claus ad. The holidays are coming. I might think of some of the big sports sponsorships too. They're the brand associations I have with that particular brand. And it's the same for a number of other brands. You'll have different associations in your head. And if you think of how sponsorship increases those emotive moments, it's not surprising that those different memories start to form in your mind about different brands. But why does it connect? And why is that relevant in today's world? Well, the first thing to say is we live in a very, very busy world. Most customers are very light, occasional buyers of brands. Brands play a very small part in our lives. If you think about it, how often do you sit at home talking about brands? Not very often. You're more likely to talk about current affairs, music, sport, arts, culture than you are about brands. And at the same time, technology is making us busier. Intrinsically linked to that, it's a cluttered world out there. People aren't replacing TV consumption. They're just adding to it with more media consumption. And as a result of that, there's more brand messages, there's more advertising, and it's very, very competitive. And when you take into consideration that we're busy, it's cluttered, it's not surprising that consumers are coping. How often do you read a magazine or Sunday newspaper, and when you finish it, how many ads can you actually recall? I would argue that only the really creative, smart ads are going to be the ones that cut through. In fact, leaning into a book by Byron Sharp called How Brands Grow, he makes the point that if the average person is to walk into a supermarket, there's up to 30 to 40,000 different brands in your average supermarket. If we were to walk into each shop and look at all those brands on their merit, we simply wouldn't be able to get out of that shop before it closed. We don't work that way. We work by coping. We work going towards brands that we have some sort of an affinity to, some sort of a brand association to, and sponsorship helps in that regard. So to take that point further, if you're thinking McDonald's, for most people, I'm sure it's the Golden Arches. It might be a long drive home from somewhere, or it might be birthday parties. For me, it's Ronald McDonald and going to birthday parties as a kid. It's probably the generation I am. If you look at AIG, I think this is probably the best example, because AIG, it's an intangible service provider. I'm not a diehard GEA fan. I'm certainly not a Dublin GEA fan. And for me, despite my accent. And when you look at this, it's hard not to think of the association between the brand and the Dubs. When I think of AIG, I think of premium, I think of excellence, I think of progression, I think of winners, and all the associations that I think of when I think of the Dubs. I also think less so, but of the All Blacks former sponsorship too. So not only does the sponsorship give an emotional connection.
Your sound has just gone there, Jamie.
Okay, are you with me now? Are you back?
Just hang on a sec now and just try and get Jamie back up on screen. There we go.
Okay,
can everyone hear me? You're back again live, yeah.
Okay, apologies about that. I was just making the point. I hope you can still all hear me. I'm down in Derrynan, Caherdaniel, County Kerry. So the Wi-Fi is pretty good, but it's probably a little bit wobbly, so bear with me. I was just making the point that obviously sponsorship provides emotive memory associations, but not only does it do that, it also provides increased presence. If you think of the Dubs and you think of AIG's relationship, think of the increased presence that AIG gets as a result of that sponsorship through presence in stadia, on shirts and so on. And that presence and salience is also called mental availability. And this is the second book I want to reference. It's How Brands Grow by Byron Sharp. And mental availability is a notion that he talks about, and he describes it as the propensity for a brand to be noticed and or thought of in buying situations. And the key to that is for brands to be distinctive and consistent. So I mentioned Coca-Cola and McDonald's, two brands that have been unbelievably consistent for decades with their logos and color palettes and so on. So those memories or associations that we have with them are very durable. And long-term sponsorships also provide that through presence of a brand. I'm sure we can think back to Opal's association with the Irish soccer team and so on. These things remain in our minds for a long time. To lean further into that notion of mental availability lifted directly from his book, I'm just going to read this. Building mental availability is about developing different memory links that relate to a brand to increase the scope of the brand-related network in people's memories, the brand's share of mind. So when you think of sponsorship, you can think of how emotion and creativity are perfectly placed to enhance mental availability. So put another way, sponsorship is an inherently emotive tool. Therefore, it helps brands to resonate with consumers while also enhancing mental availability. So emotion and presence and salience and mental availability, two very strong tenets of sponsorship that are vital in the marketing communications mix. And I'm going to talk about one more. And that is, again, I'm going to reference my third book, and this is Start With Why by Simon Sinek in 2009. It's quite an old book, and I'm sure you've come across it. And I'm going to literally lift directly from the book and talk about the power of why and why it's so relevant and how sponsorship can help brands to shine a light on their why and their brand values. Most businesses will start from the outside when they communicate. They'll start with what, they'll go to how, and then they'll go to why. So for example, here's just a makeup for a typical car commercial. First, here's our new car. It has great fuel efficiency. Do you want to buy our car? Now, if Apple, which is obviously a brand that a lot of people would have a strong affinity to, if Apple was like other companies, they would articulate their messaging as follows. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, user-friendly. Do you want to buy one? But Apple isn't like other companies, and Apple understands and starts with its why. So in fact, Apple articulates its messaging as follows. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our computers beautifully designed, easy to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Do you want to buy one? So what sponsorship helps brands to do is it helps to take consumers beyond pure rational decision-making by demonstrating brand values and making people to want to be part of them. Or in other words, sponsorship can help brands to shine a light on their why. So if you take the notion of emotion and mental availability and starting with why, I'm going to show another video now, which I think gets to the essence of that really, really well.
It's the last goodbye, I swear. I have no regrets, for the past is behind me. Tomorrow reminds me just where. Can't quite see the end. How can I rely on my heart if I break it with my own two hands? I heard all you said, don't say anything. It's the last goodbye, I swear.
So Under Armour's Rule Yourself campaign, and the sponsored asset being Michael Phelps. What's brilliant about that, in my view, is that it gets right to the why of Under Armour. Under Armour has always seen itself as a challenger brand, despite the fact that it's one of the biggest apparel brands in the world. Its attitude has always been about the underdog and proving everyone. And its campaign was selecting athletes who were doing just that. In this case, Phelps coming back. He had previous DUIs, etc. And despite being the previous champion, it was a dicey enough time for him. And it was also an unbelievably emotive execution, creative execution, and delivered significant mental availability. It happens to be one of the most shared videos, Olympic videos of all time. And what's even smarter about that was Under Armour weren't a sponsor of the Olympics at the time. So it was a way around Rule 40. I'm coming close to finishing now, but I want to just make the point that if you were to get the emotion, understand your why, and increase presence, and really embrace sponsorship properly, it's not surprising that it won't only engage and galvanize your customers and potential customers. It'll also galvanize your staff, your employees, stakeholders in your supply chain, and other stakeholders around your business. And this image of darkness into light. Electric Ireland has a staff of, I think, 3,000 or 5,000. I know there's some Electric Ireland people on the call, you correct me, but it's being an important part of the internal communications and employee engagement has been darkness in the light, as has their GEA sponsorships too. And so there's some great examples out there of Principality Stadium and so on, of other sponsors who have galvanized their entire staff and mobilized their staff through sponsorship. So it helps to protect your budget sometimes when you can ring fence it across other areas of business, not just marketing. So I've been talking about what sponsorship can deliver and some of the tenets. And just to say that what sponsorship is not, because it's also important to recognize that. Well, firstly, it's not about awareness. If your objective is to drive awareness of your brand, your product, then sponsorship will be an effective way and probably a very costly way of doing that. It absolutely is about driving awareness of your sponsorship. That's important. But if you want to just drive awareness of your brand, it's probably not the smartest move. As I've explained, it's not about short-term gains and rational. It's better placed in the long-term emotional space and for brand building and longer-term emotional objectives. It's certainly not replacing advertising. As I mentioned earlier, the importance of rational messaging, but also all the other forms of advertising that exist. Sponsorship can be an important part of the mix, not the only part. And therefore, it's not always the answer. And it's really important to analyze it properly before making any decisions. And in the next tutorial, I'll be looking at that more closely. Just as I wrap up, you might recall I showed this guy earlier on. And the reason why I showed a sacred cow is because increasingly when we have worked with some of our best clients, we've learned that the marketing departments on the sponsor side are quite often under pressure with budgets, obviously, and under pressure to get messaging out there around price, around product offerings, around switch messaging, and so on. That rational, essential messaging. But if you have sponsorships in place, they can become your brand's sacred cow. They can be the place where the role of emotion for your brand is ring-fenced, your brand values, and so on. It can be the place where you continue to have that presence in the face of different challenges that come on a weekly and daily basis. Your sponsorships will maintain that emotional presence and form those durable memory links in people's minds, and also allow you to continue to shine the why of your brand. So that's all from me. Just to say that there are a number of things I referenced in that presentation. The first was our own report, the COVID-19 sponsorship impact. It's available on the Sport for Business site. We'd love you to have a look. The second is How Brands Grow by Byron Sharp. The third is Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And the fourth, and I put a fifth in there as well, both by Les Bennett and Peter Field. The first being Marketing in an Era of Accountability, and the second being The Long and the Short of It. They're books that talk about theory and strategy in advertising and marketing communications, but have significant relevance to what we do on a daily basis in the world of sponsorship. Thank you. I hope you could hear me. It was quite surreal. I hope we got through it. All I can hear is my kids playing in the garden and myself, but hopefully it worked.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jamie. Yeah, no, very sharp. I think that hopefully everybody will have enjoyed that and learned something from it. Just looking at the numbers, I think in a lot of webinars, you find that about half of the people disappear during the course of it, and that just wasn't happening at all today. So congratulations, you've held on to everybody. A couple of questions coming through as well. Yeah, we've got David Ward from the University of Limerick. Hi, David. He was asking the question that with so many events postponed and rolling back either to the second half of 2020 or, as we've seen in the Olympics and the Euros, into 2021, do you think is there a danger that there's going to be an awful lot of clutter and brands colliding into each other with the extra amount of sport that's going to have to take place in a shortened time?
Well, firstly, I can't actually answer that question because I have no idea what's going to happen, and I don't think any of us do. But if we are to assume and imagine that everything does happen in the latter part of the year, there will be a festival and fiesta of sports and music that we're all going to indulge in. I think it's a really fair point. I think there will be an awful lot of messaging and communications going on. But the same principles that always ring true for sponsorship will be true then, and that is, well, it's time to get even more creative and even more thoughtful and strategic in how you communicate and leverage those new times that we face to activate your sponsorship. So yeah, there's going to be challenges, but I honestly just don't know what's going to happen. I don't think any of us do.
Okay, we've got one from Chris Best as well, who was asking a historic question, really, and looking at where we were a little over 10 years ago in the depths of the recession. Sponsorship actually came out of that quite well. There was a strong expenditure, perhaps down to the emotion that you mentioned in the course of the presentation, of brands trying to get people back on side at a time when they were highly emotional themselves. Then it was financial. This time it will be financial as well, but it's also the whole area of public health that we've gone through. It's an emotional time for everybody. Do you think that there will be an expansion perhaps in sponsorship as a result of having to come out of this?
I think comparing now to the financial crisis, they're totally different times. There was a lot of anger then towards certain industries and brands and sectors that isn't present now. I think it's just a very different period. So coming out of the last crisis, you've mentioned banks. It's AIB, I've gone on record many times themselves to say that sponsorship was one of the most important vehicles for them to pull their brand reputation from the bottom right back up to the top again. And that just didn't happen by accident. That happened by being really, really smart. I mean, the guys in AIB made some big decisions, and to double down on the club championships looks smart, looks like obvious now. I'm sure at the time it really was not. They'd had that property for a long time, but they really understood its potential, and they really invested in the emotion and being relevant and not intruding on the story, becoming part of it, and all the best practice examples of sponsorship. So it undoubtedly helped them to improve their brand reputation. In this current crisis, I see it as very, very different. I think there's a huge amount of goodwill out there for sponsors. I don't think anyone is to blame. So really what we see is, look, an awful lot of sponsors are going through a challenging time because their businesses have fallen off a precipice. And likewise, a lot of rights holders are going through a very challenging time because their organizations have done likewise. So we talk about this in our report. Like, now is an opportunity for both rights holders and sponsors to double down on their relationships and to see what they can do to not only enhance their, I don't want to say, I say this very conscious of the context of what we're talking about with the virus, but not only enhance their reputations, but to continue to improve their real relevance of being part of that story and part of that relationship. So for example, what Wasps Rugby Club have done in the UK, or what Musgraves is doing at the moment with the GAA, you know, I just think that's just exactly what this period is going to do. It's going to prove that sponsorship can do far more than just communications. It's a much more powerful vehicle than that. It can prove what a brand is about, the why. It can prove about the emotion, the brand value. That's what will shine through if sponsors and rights holders get it right now. So I hope that answers the question, but that would be my answer to that.
That's great. And as a follow-up as well, Vicky Donlan from Leopardstown. Hi, Vicky. She was mentioning the Club Together initiative. And while you were speaking, I got through my confirmation email, having signed up through my local GAA club. What Vicky is asking, what do brands need to be sensitive to in an example like this, or in a situation like this, where they want to be front of mind, they want to be seen to be genuinely doing the right thing, but there's a fine line between tipping over into being seen perhaps to be capitalizing on it? Where does that line sit, and how sensitive do brands need to be?
Look, tone is crucial, obviously. Our creative practice in core sent around a document internally just this morning or yesterday. And one thing that jumped out at me was, if you're questioning how will it land, don't do it. I think that's probably the best rule of thumb, because if there's even a question or doubt about it, probably not worth taking the risk. That said, we believe that there's been different phases to what's happening. There's been the reaction, the adaptation, the recovery kind of phase of what's going on. And there is a place for humor now. There is a place for different types of content. But yeah, I think that probably that single barometer would be, if it doesn't feel right, don't risk it. Tone is really key. It's probably the right time to do some of the initiatives like the likes of what SuperValu and so on are doing, or An Post are doing at the moment, to really assist with the national effort to get out of this crisis. That's probably the sort of the space to play in, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a great sense there, that if you have to ask the question, then it's probably not quite right. Gary Stewart from volleyball was asking a question about strategic for national governing bodies and things like that, and we're actually going to come to that in part on Thursday, aren't we, Jamie, in the second session?
Yeah. So today's sort of, I suppose, tutorial has been around what sponsorship can deliver, mostly from a brand and sponsor point of view, but it's equally relevant from a rights holder to kind of understand how sponsors can strategically look at sponsorship to assist with their marketing effort. On Thursday, we're going to look at really the journey of developing a sponsorship strategy. Again, it will be predominantly from a brand sponsor point of view, but again, equally relevant for the rights holder to kind of understand the journey that sponsors go on. So we'll be looking at defining objectives, going right through to insight development and execution and so on. There is some stuff in there about contracting and looking for properties and things like that. So I think that's really relevant to rights holders.
Okay, we've got a few more coming in now. Brendan Meehan, who was just joined up with Irish American Events. Hopefully, we'll be having Notre Dame and Navy in the Aviva Stadium before too long, at the end of the summer. Asking how the situation that we're in at the moment with COVID-19, it might change the sponsorship landscape over time. Priorities are obviously in a state of flux at the moment, and there's going to be concerns over the economic impact on jobs and how people have money to spend. But do you think that will lead to a delay in sponsorship coming back to where it's been at the moment, or as we spoke earlier, is there a possibility that it might actually go more to the fore in terms of how brands are marketing?
Look, that's a really difficult question. My colleagues and I, Jill Downey, the managing director of Core Sponsorship, and Noel Martin, and my colleagues, we've discussed this at length in the last few days. Look, we don't think that the world of sponsorship is very unlikely to be the same. In fact, the sports world is unlikely to be exactly the same as it was before this crisis. There's going to have to be a reorganization of competitions and events that may become more long-lasting. There's been a new way that we're all consuming media. There's a new way that we're all engaging with one another. And obviously esports is kind of actually finding a bit of its momentum now, and with audiences that were a little bit further out from the hardcore sort of esports fan set and so on. So all those things are likely to have some sort of a lasting impact on where sponsorship is going. So it's again, I think it's impossible to say just now, but we definitely anticipate things not to be the same after this crisis.
Okay. Last couple, I think, that we've got Ryle Nugent. Hello, Ryan. Ryle, glad to have you with us this morning. Probably quite relieved not to be having to fill so many hours of space on TV at the moment with RTE. You're asking a very pertinent question in terms of brands that would be involved in sponsorship, whether you think that there will be a look over time, not in the immediate short term, I don't think, for some form of compensation as to some of the value that they will now have lost out on, or whether you think that they'll be looking to add in additional bits of value towards the back end of a deal. I see that Visa last night, they were the first ones to come out and say to their athletes, 96 athletes they have on the team, including the O'Donovan brothers, that we're with you. That if you want to be remain on the Visa program, we're staying with you. So they're not missing out. But if it was a tournament that didn't take place or didn't conclude, is there a question of compensation that might arise? Well,
firstly, hi, Royal. Royal gave me one of my best opportunities in my career, and I was to become a producer of the FIFA World Cup in 2010 in South Africa, and I've always been grateful for that. Thank you, Royal. Secondly, on that point, sorry, I've just completely forgotten the question, Rob. What was it again?
Compensation.
Kid was banging in the
tricky
room.
One.
Yeah, sorry. Look, the best sponsorships don't go by the letter of the law. And yes, there probably will be a lot of legal rationale for looking for compensation or breaking contracts early and so on. And of course, sponsors are going to have to look very closely at that. And some sponsors might not have a choice because their business will be in peril. But the sponsorship is about relationships at the end of the day, and the best relationships help to provide and foster the best sponsorships. And we would say that right now is probably not the right time to be looking at breaking contracts and looking for compensation if you can avoid it. It won't go down well with fans. It's likely to leave a long-lasting negative taste in people's mouths. And if we go back to what I presented earlier about memory associations and a power of emotion, that's not the sort of a memory associations and power of emotion you want to have about your brand and business. So really, I think the savvy sponsors will do everything they can to not do that and to assist in whatever way they can. But I will say that really, really cautiously, because of course, there's just businesses out there that are in a really, really difficult time. If it comes to a point where they have to end a relationship or look for some sort of compensation, if that has to happen, I think the communication and how that is done will be really, really important. We've got a strategic thinking behind that.
Okay, yeah, it is definitely going to be one that will be exercising a lot of...
My kids are banging at the door there. I hope you can't hear it. Apologies.
No, that's all right. You're okay. John Gillick from AIG. Hey, John. Not only good to see AIG on the screen on the Dublin jersey, but for Conor O'Callaghan to be wearing it as well as a good fellow club man of mine. Delighted to see that, Jamie. Well done. Good pick. John is just asking, do you think is this going to have an impact on rights fees over time? Not necessarily in the short term, but maybe in the longer term as well. It's going to push broadcasters onto the back foot a little bit. Is there a danger, I guess, that it might just begin to deflate some of the sports market that's out there?
Honestly, John, I'm not even going to pretend to answer that question. I don't know. I really don't know. The world that we're in just seems to be changing day by day, let alone week by week. There's going to be some consequences of this, of course, on fees paid, deferments of payments, different ways, creative ways of doing deals, maybe flexing benefit in kind, possibly, lengthening out certain deals in order to facilitate payments over a longer period of time. There's going to have to be creative solutions to how this comes out in the wash. But I wouldn't even pretend to be able to answer that question with any certainty at this point.
Okay, I think I had a row with the journalist over the weekend about. He was accusing me of being too positive and too optimistic about the way that sport can bounce back. But I think that it probably is going to be one of those core elements that actually does bring us back together again. We've come together by staying apart, but we do need to come back together physically.
Yeah.
And as somebody said to me, no, don't worry about that. It's just that we'll all go to the pub. Well, I kind of hope that it's not just going to the pub. And I think that sport is one of the ones that could really copper fasten the emotional connection that it has to people's minds, but it is a long way away. I think we've just got one more question that will come through from Matt Gill. Hi, Matt. He's asking a question a little bit more specific and around the Olympic Games. We've now got an additional 12 months potentially to think about ways of circumventing Rule 40 during the Olympic Games. Do you think is that sort of disruptive element, and we highlighted Under Armour there sort of using theirs. Now that wasn't outside of Rule 40, that was a post games piece of content that they produced. But do you think is the success of that likely to give rise to more brands looking and thinking, well, I can't afford the 100 million that that some brands are paying to have an association with the Olympics, or do you think that that the brands that have a tied to it? I had the quote of the day this morning came from the chief content officer at Visa, who was talking about how he knew that this Olympics was going to be big, but now he thinks it's going to be 10 times bigger. So the stakes are correspondingly higher for those brands that are in the FBDs, the Indeed, who are, and Circle K, who are supporting the Irish team here. Do you think will they benefit, or do you think is there a greater danger of disruptors?
I'd hate to use the word benefit given what's going on, but certainly there's an opportunity. There's a longer run in now to the games, isn't there? So there's an opportunity to increase the association with the sponsor property. So technically speaking, yes, there is an opportunity there. It'll require more investment, which might not be forthcoming to either to refresh copy and creative and ideas, or if not even to support existing stuff. So I think in that sense, yeah. With regards to Rule 40, infamous Rule 40, it's being relaxed, slowly around different federations and so on around the world, and that's welcomed obviously by athletes in particular. We've been fortunate enough to work with the Gymnastics Ireland of late, fantastic organisation, and Rhys McElligan has been flying the flag so superbly. And I think when you meet someone like Rhys, who's only 20 or something, and you think how that change in that rule, how that relaxing of that rule could impact him, it just makes so much sense. It was much stricter before, and I think brands had to be very creative. They still will have to be. There's still rules around it, but the relaxing of Rule 40 is welcome, and I do think the pushing of the games out definitely creates opportunities. But it will require more investment. It will require more thinking and more resource to maximise those opportunities. So that would be about sort of what I'd say to that. Okay,
on that point, and a quick nod out to Caroline Ladewith from Gymnastics Ireland, who's with us this morning as well. I've got to say that Rhys's home gymnastics workout was one of my favourite pieces of how to stay fit during the crisis. I tried it, failed miserably. Funnily enough, I just don't have quite that same upper body strength as the lad. Jamie, thank you very much. Thanks to everybody for joining us this morning. We will be back on Thursday morning at 11 o'clock, same time. You'll be getting a second invitation out. It's a separate link to bring you in here. Hopefully the technology has worked for everybody that's out there, and I'm pretty sure that the content will have whetted your appetite for more and inspired you to go back into the rest of your day. I'm going to be sending out just a brief, sort of summary survey of what you thought of it, and also to get your thoughts on how we might actually develop this and even bring in a little bit more content into this whole arena during the time that we're in lockdown. So for now, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Jamie, for a great presentation, and we'll see you all back again, same time, same place on Thursday morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone.